Welcome to Her Lights, your home for women's sports coverage. I'm your host, Erin Foley, a stand-up comic, TV writer, and most important, an obsessed sports fan. I break down the best games, highlight the best stories, and interview the best from the world of women's sports. So put on your jerseys, stretch out your hammies, and let's do this. Hello, Herlighters. It's Erin Foley back in the booth talking women's sports. I have a great guest today. She's the author of Girls with Goals, How Women's Soccer Took Over the World, a brand new book that traces the game from its 19th century English roots through bans, backlash, and the global boom we're living in right now. It's page after page of lady power. I loved it. Welcome to the show, Clelia Castro-Malaspina.
Thank you for having me, Erin. This is awesome.
So excited. Well, we already got our discussion, pre-recorded discussion about Zoom panic over. So now we are ready to go.
So ready.
Well, I absolutely loved it. I knew I was going to love it because when we met at Rough and Tumble Women's Sports Bar, and
That's
I
right.
thought, well, she's a keeper because we met at Rough and Tumble Women's Sports Bar.
Fair enough. That's the barometer of cool people, I think.
Um, but I have to say, so I was there hosting a panel on the 85ers, the first U.S. women's national team. And then after reading the book, I'm like, it's actually kind of perfect because it's such a fantastic look at like the history of women's soccer, which we'll dive into. But give us the quick like overview, and then I've got some 8,000 nerdy talking points, which I have to pare down, which is going to hurt me. But
Love it. Love
hit
it.
it, hit it.
Okay, so this is a YA book about the entire history of women's soccer from its very, very humble beginnings in like Victorian England to now. And it is like the first book in both the kids or adult market that talks about that entire history kind of end to end or end to the point we're at now, which was a surprising fact to me.
I had no, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just another bit of evidence of like how women's sports don't aren't taken haven't been taken so seriously that this sport that's been super popular for years did not have like a commercial trade book dedicated to its history.
Well, it is women, so I guess I shouldn't be shocked. But yet again, I am. I am
Yeah.
always. I
Yeah.
guess I should say I'm surprised, not shocked.
Yeah.
But it's still like mind blowing. Okay, what I want to talk about the YA of it all before we get
Sure.
into to deep dive, because what I loved about this book, well, first of all, it's such a pleasure to read as an adult
Thank you.
on so many levels. First of all, the history is just absolutely fascinating. But a lot of people, you hear history and they go, "Oh, snooze fest." But it was so entertaining. It was fascinating. It was just in. I mean, obviously, you could say as an adult, it's an easier read. But for
Sure.
me, I loved that. It's like you
Yeah.
work all day. There's stuff,
Yeah.
and sometimes you just want a clear, interesting understanding of women's sports without being like, citing 8,000 notations. Sometimes it gets dry
Right.
and boring, but this was just, I just love your writing style. Yeah, it was entertaining and a page turner. And I know obviously you're going in with the YA hat on, but this is a book, in my opinion, for absolutely everybody.
Well,
But what was your thinking going in for the YA market?
yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I mean, I've worked in kids and teen publishing for like almost 15 years, so I'm definitely like a writer in that world. But for me, like I knew this topic would have broad appeal. So, and so did the publisher. And so we chose YA, and part of my challenge as a writer is to make it as accessible as possible, right? As entertaining as possible. I took a lot of different approaches, some storytelling, you give some history and stuff like that, a lot of visual elements, stuff that makes it really engaging for the reader. And you know, teenagers are young adults, so that works for an older audience too. That's been true in fiction. It's definitely true in nonfiction. Thank you for saying that, noticing that. And actually, because there's no like racy content in this book either, so it's actually worked for a younger audience too. So I have found readers like as young as 7, and then but also through adults. Like I work in publishing. You're not supposed to say that this is a book for all ages because we really do have targeted readerships. But this has proven to be an exception. This has proven to be a book for all ages. If you're a fan, you're gonna like this book.
How does I just have to take a second. How does that feel to say that? Like, that's a huge accomplishment.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I the fact that this book exists and I wrote it is still mind blowing to me. Like I grew up like such a fan of soccer. I was 16 in the 99 World Cup and it blew my damn mind. And have been such a fan of women's soccer since then. And you know, which is why I wrote this book. I wrote this book essentially for like young me. And I know that there's a lot of young me's out there now and have been and were out there. And so the fact that it's here and I wrote it is just it's so, so special. This I really consider this kind of like my biggest contribution I've made in my life thus far. It's just I'm really, really proud of it.
Well, you should be because well, I mean, we're doing the podcast about it, but I just want to like call everyone and be like, just buy this book. Doesn't matter
Oh,
if you have
please do.
kids or not or whatever. So I'm going to be preaching it from the hillside. So what,
Yeah.
like, you wake up one day and you're like, okay, why this book? Why now? Give us the little like seed of inspiration.
Yeah, so I mean, it was like, excuse me, 2 years ago, I was watching the Women's World Cup with my then 5-year-old daughter, and it was like just this really nice moment. We're sharing this my love with my young daughter, and you know, they'll play like sort of like historical segments sometimes during the course of a World Cup or the Olympics or something like that. So they did one. I was like, huh, I didn't know that. That's so interesting. I wonder if there's a book on this topic. Went on the old internet. There was not. And I was like, huh, I wonder if there's a book on women's soccer's history at all. There wasn't. And then it just like struck me like lightning. I was like, I will write this book. And then I did.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, it's what's so interesting to me is like while I'm reading this book at the same point in time, I'm doing this like insane deep dive on the 1985 first U.S. women's national
Yeah.
team. And in like, 3 or 4 months of doing all this research, I'm like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And it was just like kind of mind blowing moments of just like, and then at the same point in time, the movie Copa
Yes.
71 came
Mhm.
out, which was mind blowing.
Totally.
And I had done, listeners go back, I do a whole episode on Copa 71, but it's just the starts and the stops. This is where I want to
Yeah.
start this podcast. The starts and the stops of women's soccer from day one. I wound up not being able to read parts of this book right before I went to bed because I was so angry. And then I'd be like, I know it's going to end well, but I have to get through it. But the early history is just so fascinating, and you
Yeah.
make it so accessible. And we'll talk about the archival photographs that you put in. But I'm wondering if you could just sort of give us like this kind of overview on just a couple of the early starts and stops, men, federation, of
Yes.
of banning women's soccer.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well,
That,
we have
yeah,
an early history of that.
yeah,
I think one of the most surprising things is that women's soccer really has its origins in Victorian England. You know, the like corset, big bustly skirt era. There were very brave countercultural women at the time who were like, the hell with that. We're playing football, you know? And the very first like women's soccer team football club was the British Ladies Football Club in London that was started by this amazing woman named Nettie Honeyball, who was the best picture in the whole book, I think.
so good.
And these like brave middle class women just like took to the field and it was really at the time seen more of a spectacle more than a sport. But it was actually like pretty popular. And then one of the first time like the FA kind of got involved and made it hard for women to play soccer is this team, the women British Ladies Football Club, would go around playing each other, but then sometimes they played men's teams, which was the biggest draw, and then the FA banned men from playing women's teams. So basically their business model fizzled and that team went away for like I guess like 20 years. And then the next kind of like time women's soccer really had a boost was actually during World War One. So everyone who listens to your podcast, I'm sure, has seen the movie A League of Their Own,
Yeah.
the movie where during World War II, the men went away, the women started playing the All-American Women's Baseball League. So kind of the same thing happened
Yeah.
in during World War One in England with soccer, which is something I, a huge women's soccer fan, did not know before I wrote this book. Um, so during World War I, the men went away to war. The women started working in the factories for the first time ever. Prior to that, they were told they were too weak, too fragile to kind of work these tough jobs. But in the culture at the time, the kind of like local football squads were made up of people who worked at places of work, so like factories, hospitals. So when the men were gone, the women were there working in the factories, and someone got the bright idea, like, let's have them play football too, but they could play for these charity games where they raise money for, the boys abroad. And they did, and they became hugely popular. And I'm thinking of one team in particular. So these women worked at an ammunition factory called the Dick Kerr Factory, and they formed a squad called the Dick Kerr Ladies Football Club. They were incredible. They were like amazing. They won game after game. They had this one player, Lily Parr, who started out like 15 years old. At the end of her career, she scored like literally 1,000 goals. She was incredible. And these women would draw huge, huge crowds to their games. I'm talking about like 50,000 people, like an insane number, an insane number. This is like in the late 1910s, early 1920s. This is an insane number of people watching women's football. And it was hugely, hugely popular. And this idea that football was inappropriate for women had kind of been surpassed by the fact that these women were doing a patriotic thing, sending money away to support the war effort. And also, like, people were probably looking for some fun at a dark
Yeah.
time. And so, they were kind of allowed to play the sport. But then the men came back. And then war was over. They went back to their jobs. Some women had to leave working despite having worked for a while. And men's football kind of got started again. But the problem was, from the FA's perspective, was that the women's games were still super popular. And even one match had more people attend than like a final in the men's final. And so that made them upset. So what the FA did, despite this huge success of this team and that they were beloved, internationally known, by the way. The first women's team to play abroad, they played France. Um, they basically banned them from playing on any FA associated field, which was every single field. So they banned women from playing soccer. And they cited reasons that women were weak, they shouldn't mess up their reproductive systems, they were fragile. It was awful. So these women who went from being like these strong athletes who drew all of these people to their games suddenly went to having nothing, which is just so tragic. And what was worse, it was like this was kind of like a contagious feeling. So like the entire United Kingdom, like Australia, Canada, Scotland, like they took on this ban, but also other countries like Germany, even Brazil, which is like such an amazing history in soccer, they went as far as making it against the law, like a law on the books saying women can't play soccer, all because they were like essentially the weaker sex. They were protecting them for their own
I
good.
this is when I
It's
this
for
is
their
when
own
I
good,
lost my
Erin.
mind.
Yes.
All right, there's a lot to unpack there. Let's go into
Yeah.
a little bit. There was yeah, I mean, first of all, I love the whole book, but that first 60, 70 pages of again, I'm a huge soccer fan, also doing this research project on the 85ers. Well, it's not a project, it's going to be a seven
Yeah,
episode
sure.
podcast series, but no idea. I had
Yeah.
absolutely no idea. Now, again, this is why the book is so important because you know, you you're like, okay, you get caught up with like, oh, like the World Cups, and now we've got like a well-oiled machine, but you have to know where everything started.
Yes.
And these women, and it just this notion of like a couple of women basically showing up and saying, okay, we're going to create a team. We're just going to keep pushing this forward, right? um, Shows up now throughout history. Even in this 85ers deep dive that I'm doing,
Yeah.
we're unearthing all these women in the 70s, like a Bernadette Noonan in the Seattle area, where she just was like, no, we just showed up and started, like, got backlash after backlash. There's a story about
Hmm.
a guy at University of Washington. They were trying to make the women's sports, the college soccer program, a varsity program, and he goes, over my dead body. And I'm like, this is what literally has happened since like you've
Yeah.
unearthed
From
all
the
of this
beginning.
history that the federation again and again has come down on women saying it's fragile, you can't birth a child, all of
Yeah.
this. And it was still happening in the 70s and 80s. And then it happened, of course, in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s with the equal pay and all of it. It's so aggravating, but it's so fascinating and important to know.
Yeah. I mean, women fought tooth and nail to play the sport they love generation after generation after generation. And yes, they made little gains along the way, but it's just their love of the sport really like pushed them through. And a lot of these women were so brave and so countercultural and helped get us here. And I'm just so grateful to them.
I know because it's like you have to start somewhere, right? You have to
Yeah.
just keep pushing and then it's like five steps forward, three steps back. So these stories that you unearth, it's that first of all, the Dick Kerr is, that's a movie. I literally was like,
100%.
I have to Google that. I have to write it immediately. No, but it was so League of Their Own,
Mhm.
but the fact that like women could be okay, like you can work in an ammunition factory, that's fine. That's totally fine. Strength, endurance, all of that. But now you take it on the field, and now more strength and confidence and endurance, and then the men are like, oh no 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 you can't do that.
It was so infuriating to me how they could just like take it away
Yeah.
one day. It was just one day, one decree, and it was all gone.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like lady power. It's like it not only was like a book about obviously the history of women's soccer, but why it's so important, I think, also for the YA space is like girls and boys need to be reading this book because these are like heroes on every single page.
Yes,
Like give them an example of just like first of all, the Nettie Honeyball. That's the
best. My
greatest
girl.
name
Yes.
I've ever heard of in my entire life. And the Lily Parr, like they can look at me like, oh my God, well, if they could do this in a time period that like they were ridiculed, like all the archival footage of you have of just like it was like circus acts for
Yeah.
women to be playing,
Yeah. In
you know,
Chile.
and,
Yeah.
and for them to like read it and go, oh my God, well, look what these women can do. I can at least get to practice or I can move this idea forward. Like I thought the book was just so empowering, which
Yeah.
was
Thank you.
like a fantastic accomplishment.
Thank you. The world is a dark place right now, but I
Yes.
feel like one persistent source of light is women's sports. And like it has been, my algorithm right now, I'm really proud of it
Yes.
on social media because of my book. I get so much women's sports content. Most of it is so positive, and it's just like we reach mile after milestone, milestone after milestone, and of late, and it's heartwarming, good stuff. And this book, as much as there's like some frustrating moments for it, it's overall really positive and inspiring. And it's just like, women started off with nothing, women soccer players, and at the end, they end up with almost everything. You know what I mean? Over the course of this fight, and it's just to me, it's so inspiring. And it's like there's so few like stories in history where women are kind of always the victor. And in women's soccer, women have always been the victor.
Yeah, when we were allowed, when we
Yeah.
were allowed to play. And I think honestly, I don't think I'm talking at a school here because I think, just in this kind of 70s and on period of I'm basically researching like early 70s through like late 80s,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
I really didn't know much.
Hmm.
But, I think there was this initially, I think there's some really good people in U.S. soccer pushing the women's game forward. Now, mostly women on the outside pressuring, but I'm just saying they got there,
Yeah.
formed this team in '85. You know what I mean? I think there was a lot of good eggs pushing the game. So I'm not doing a whole like the Federation is terrible.
Yeah.
But as we've seen, at some point, when the women, just like this turn of the century teams, when they started winning and they started amassing these crowds, and the men, and I am a huge supporter of the U.S. men's national team. Like, I
Sure.
want them to win. I
Yes.
watch the games. Like, this is not like I'm pitting women against men at all. Um, but as soon as the women start surpassing the men, now U.S. soccer support and is just dwindling and dwindling
Yeah.
and dwindling. And now we're
Yeah.
literally fighting for an equal paycheck. And that has
Yeah.
started since the earliest federation.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, you can see it in modern day, women's soccer history.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
outrageous. So it's the same feeling. Like when I'm reading your book, I'm like, oh God damn it, it's the same thing.
History repeating itself.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, luckily, you know, today we have we can look back and see all these women who did successfully push and get more. And I think that's inspiring. One of the reasons I wrote the book, to kind of like inspire young girls and also for have them understand like what a privilege it is for them to just be able to focus on soccer, and not necessarily have to fight to like even play at all or fight for a field or a uniform or whatever. They funding like today for the most part, young girls today, they can just focus on playing soccer.
I know. It's incredible. And I think a lot of them realize that.
Yeah.
However, I do think like this, first of all, this book should be required reading just it doesn't matter if you like soccer or not. It should be required
Thank
reading,
you.
but every single person playing soccer should read this book. Also, if you just like want to be empowered just as a woman and inspired, you should read the book. But just a couple more questions. Like
Sure.
how did you bring in, because it's already like I think I can't even imagine hard enough to write an entire book, but how did you bring in the visuals? Like how did that come about?
Yeah, well, I have to give so much credit to my publisher, they did an amazing job with this. Just like they saw the potential of the story and how it could be the book could be just visually. We had an incredible designer who just gave the book a beautiful look. Um, but for us, I felt, especially with nonfiction for teens, like it's not like the sexiest genre. So anything you can do to kind of like bring people in is really helpful for this genre. And the pictures were so important to that. So
Yes.
I was luckily given a good budget for photos. They are the ones who ultimately found the photos. I kind of like ID'd areas where I thought photos would work really well, and they typically agreed and even brought in more moments. But I really do think the visuals absolutely helped make the book succeed.
Yeah, when you're describing someone that's like, a woman that lived in the, early 1900s and she's wearing knickerbockers to the game,
Yeah,
right? And you have like a little bit of a visual, but still, it's only probably because like, I've seen knickerbockers before. I'm also a
sure.
Knicks fan, and I had to look up what a knickerbocker was. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But for like modern, for young kids, they're not going to get it at all. But when you see the picture, you go, "Oh my God, they played in that!"
Yeah, for sure. And I've
Yeah.
done some speaking to like younger kids, and I always bring those photos up. Even to the older kids, I always show those photos, and they're always like so shocked at what women had wore to play soccer back then. I'll also add that Quarto, my publisher, paid to colorize the photos. So a lot of these early ones were black and white, but we had them colorized to really maximize the impact.
Well, high five to whoever did it, because it really like captured, even those moments that we just discussed of like there's actual, just for listeners, there's actual photos in here of like announcements, like women playing soccer. What an oddity! What a hilarious sight!
Yeah.
And once you like physically see that as a reader, you're like, oh my God, it's a carnival. It
Yeah.
truly
Oh,
is.
truly. The designer and illustrator's named Michelle Brackenborough, so I want to make sure I say her name. She's amazing. Yeah.
Well, you'll text me like her email or like website or something, and we can put it in the show notes
Okay,
because
cool. Yeah.
yeah, it just did an absolutely like just incredible design, and it really, yeah, it just like it brought the storytelling up like a notch, which is obviously the whole point. But I just want
I
to ask you
totally
about that.
agree. Thank you.
When you're doing like the nerdy deep dives, first of all, do you enjoy the archival
I
nerdy deep
so enjoy
dives?
it. I
Okay, talk
so
to me,
enjoy
talk to me about
it.
that.
Well, I want to also give a shout out to like so like academia and women's soccer, they're also pioneers in that. So there's this incredible academic named Jean Williams who I had the good fortune to meet when I was out in London in July. But she was one of the very first like serious academics who thought that women's soccer, women's football, she's British, was worthy of study. And she's the one who unearthed the stuff about these earliest games. The first matches were in the 1880s. She unearthed that stuff about Nettie Honeyball, Dick Kerr. She went out and checked, especially for these early games, like old newspapers, old church registers, journals, finding any mention of women playing soccer. Like to be a women's soccer academic, you are essentially like an investigator, an archaeologist, you're a treasure hunter. You're like looking for any mention because like women's history has been unrecorded or
Yeah.
poorly recorded, certainly about women's sports. So they themselves are pioneers. And I basically read Jean Williams's entire body of work. Just a joy. And she's a very sassy woman. I really appreciated meeting her. Really fun. But and other academics too have just done the incredible work of doing these deep dives. And I will say, Jean was probably one of the first, but since then, other people have taken up the mantle and done research in their own worlds. Like a book came out a couple years ago about South America. A book came out just this past year about women's soccer in Africa. And just this history is, we're learning more as we go, and there'll be more. Maybe I can do an addendum in the coming years, we're learning more. There's definitely countries that my dad's from Peru, and no one has done a deep dive there on the history of women's soccer in Peru, which I imagine does have a history. But I'd love to see that written one day. But the research it was so fun to kind of just go in, and I spent a year of my life like so steeped in this. And it was a good way to spend a year, especially, recent. It's a good way, good distraction.
Absolutely.
And when you're writing a book of this length and of one with such a big scope, it's pretty good idea to do it on a topic that you love and appreciate because you're so deep in it.
Yeah, yeah, I can relate on this on a very
Yes.
small level. But did you have days like, again, on my very small level, I would have days where I was like, okay, I'm going to start researching like what the landscape was like for women in the 70s, right? And then all of a sudden, like 3 hours goes by, and I'm on a complete different
So
tangent
deep.
of
Yeah.
like, wait a minute. When did obviously the Title IX impact, which is a whole chapter of your book, but of like, okay, wait a minute. So it went from club to like state level to national
Oh,
level.
yeah.
But then when did the NCAA take over of the
You
AIW?
get in the weeds. You get so deep in the weeds. Yeah. And then
And then
sometimes
yeah.
that leads you to find something that you weren't expecting to find, which is fun too. And other times you end up just reading nonsense for a
Oh,
while.
I know, I know,
Like,
I know. I come up for air and I'm like, well, okay, none of that is probably
oh,
necessary,
well.
but what a fantastic afternoon. And then you check
Yeah,
the
for
news and you're
sure.
like, I'm
For
going to go
sure.
actually go, I'm going to go back into the 19. But one of the things I discovered, which is the whole point of this, which is in your book, is, first of all, the Copa 71. And if you're out there
Yeah.
listening and you have not watched this movie, it's a documentary on, basically the women's first World Cup in Mexico City in 1971. That was immediately, because it was a huge success, 100,000 people, Azteca Stadium in Mexico City, immediately banned.
Yeah.
Just FIFA was like, oh wow, women are doing great, and there's so many crowds. So we're just going to ban it, and we're going to like take all the records off, and what is the word, a sponge or whatever, sponge. I don't know, whatever. Erase it is what I'm trying to say. But anyway, in that
Expunge. Expunge.
because I was like, I know it's there. This is like, perimenopause. It's like I know it's there. I just can't actually put it in my brain.
You got
Um,
like two-thirds of it. It was
yeah,
good.
2/3. I'm just going to say dirty sponge. They dirty sponged it. Um, but one of the deep dives in that 70s realm came across the tournament in Italy in 1970. Um,
Oh, yeah.
again, which is in your book, and I hearken it back to the beginning of your book of like how many people were going to these games? 50,000 people were going to these games. It was right there the whole time. That's what's so
It
infuriating.
was. There were so many opportunities for women's soccer to have just grown exponentially at earlier points in the last 100 years. But it took a long time for it
Yeah.
to really settle in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the second half of your book, well, first of all, the whole book is great, but the second half obviously gets a little bit more positive. It gets a little bit,
Yes.
well, actually, it all is positive because you can look at it two ways. You can look at it, my first initial actually reaction, obviously, is just like so angered. It's just angry
Yeah.
towards this male federation, but it's also at the same time so inspiring because it's like generation after generation of women that just keep going because they love it and they keep pushing it. So it is
Yeah.
still inspiring. But then, just listeners, just to give you like just a little, I'm just going back to the table of contents. Like you literally go through the 50-year ban, Title IX, the first World Cup, game changers. You had fashion on the fields, and then a league of their own, the 99ers, the start of the NWSL, equality, abuse, futures female. I mean, you covered all of it. It's so
Yeah. All
expansive
there.
and
Yeah.
so
And
interesting.
thank you. And we really tried to give it like a global hue too, that it's not just an American
Yes.
story. I think having grown up as a kid in the 90s, I thought, women's soccer started with us, but that was not true. And now it's a global game, famously. And so, we really work to bring in like just the broader perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I know we're winding down, but if you were like giving like a pitch to why, like if you're talking to teenagers today, like what would you like if you're talking even to your daughters and stuff, like why read this book?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just, I've touched upon it earlier, but it's just like women have been through so much in history. And this is really kind of captures a lot of the struggles women have faced and being told that they're weak, that they're meant to be at home and raise kids, and they're not equal to men. I think that encapsulates a lot of that, cute energy that has been put in the world the last hundreds of years. But this is like women here like fought back and to do something they loved, and that is important to know that women, if they make themselves known, if they stick to doing what they want to do, if they stick together, if they do what they love, that they can make progress, even in the face of so much, misogyny, of bias. And this ultimately, I want this to be a hopeful story. I want this to be an inspiring story, and it is. And women's soccer took a while to grow up and find its place in the world. But now that it's here to stay, and it's going to be, and to witness what we're witnessing now is so beautiful and amazing. But it took a lot to get here. And knowing that, I think helps you appreciate the moment and appreciate the strong women that helped us get here.
Yes. Amen. That's it for today's episode of Her Lights. If you're loving the show, do me a huge favor. Wherever you listen, rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps me grow the podcast and get more people discovering how amazing women's sports are. Leave a 5-star rating and drop a fun review. I will pick my favorites and read them on air. And if you've got a story or an athlete or a game I should know about, send me an email at erin@herlights.com. I absolutely love hearing from all of you. Fans, friends, family, have the best week of your life.